Man, you gotta love these antique computers. Great for playing Tetris. Not so good for running your enterprise data infrastructure though. So why is it that people are still using user interfaces for data wrangling that go back to the era of the original Macintosh? Hi, I'm Professor Joe Hellerstein. Welcome back to the Data School. Today, we're going to be talking about 50 years of history in the user experience for data wrangling. There are three generations of legacy interfaces for data transformation: code, spreadsheets, and graphical data flow programming. Now, all three of these interfaces are still in use today, but they're getting pretty long in the tooth. In the beginning, there was code. Back in about 1970, we saw the first programming language for data transformation. It ran on mainframe computers that you would program from dumb terminals. It was developed in North Carolina as part of a project called SAS, and the language itself was called DataStep. And it let you take a terminal like this and type on a keyboard and write code to transform your data. Now, like other programming languages of the time, think of Fortran or C, you can port this language to your favorite computer today and keep running it, but the user experience will be very much the same as the one you had in 1970. I get it. Experts love to program. Coders gonna code. Powerful libraries are available to these people. They can do almost anything. But let's talk about the standard interface for coding, the text editor. How's this for an interface for manipulating data? I call this the existential crisis of the blinking cursor. You have no idea what content you're working with, you have no idea what commands you can issue, and by the way, where's the data? This is like driving with a blindfold on. Fast forward to 1977, the introduction of the Apple II computer. Suddenly, you didn't need a mainframe to work with data. You could have one right here in your own home, well, with a little bit of data on a floppy disk. Just a couple years after this guy was introduced, VisiCalc was invented, the first spreadsheet. Suddenly, with VisiCalc, you could see your data. It was laid out in rows and columns right on the screen, and you could directly manipulate it using the arrow keys. It was like suddenly the data was there for you, and you were living in it, you were working with it. Things really changed. And today, the spreadsheet is still the go-to interface for anybody who's an end user working with data. But what about when you have more than a few screenfuls of data that might not fit on your home computer? Surely there's some kind of industrial strength solution for transforming data? Well, if you're watching this video, you're probably familiar with 90s technology called ETL, Extract, Transform, Load. And tools like Informatica, which was developed in the 90s, or Alteryx, which was developed in the 2000s. Well, that stuff runs on one of these, a personal computer. Where did those interfaces come from? Well, maybe it's no surprise, but this idea goes back to the introduction of the Apple Macintosh, which shocked the world in 1984. Windows, icons, menus, and the mouse pointer, the WIMP interface, it changed the way we think about interacting with computers. And it also changed the way we think about interacting with programs. A piece of software was released 2 years after the Mac called LabVIEW. The idea with LabVIEW was what was called graphical data flow programming. Instead of putting down commands in an editor and giving them parameters, you would take a picture of a command, an icon, drag it onto a canvas, double-click it, and put the parameters into a box. So that was a much more graphical way of talking about your programs. And one of the advantages of this, when you're done with the program, you actually have a picture of it, and you can sort of see the process of things going through the program. What's striking is how little innovation we've seen since the time of LabVIEW in the data transformation space. We're still using that same interface in tools like Informatica and Alteryx. And by the way, where's the data? Graphical data flow programming was not designed primarily for working with data, and it's completely missing from the user experience. Somehow, when this was adopted for data transformation, the lessons of spreadsheets were lost. And you know what they say, those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. Speaking of history, the Macintosh was a landmark innovation, but that was a long time ago, and nearly everything's changed in computing since then. The web, the cloud, the iPhone and iPad, social media, so much has changed, the data transformation industry somehow is still stuck in the past. When my co-founders and I started talking to end users about 10 years ago about how they were dealing with data, it was clear that the lack of innovation had come to a crisis point. Data was ballooning everywhere. IT departments were inundated with requests for cuts of data from lines of business. Business users were waiting forever to get data from IT, and the data itself was just growing. When you talk to those end users, though, they didn't talk about ETL tools. They talked about wrangling their data. And so as we were thinking about technology, we asked, how can we get those end users tools to do data wrangling at the scale of modern data sets? The result is what we call predictive interaction. This is a technology that we pioneered at Trifacta. It gets your eyeballs on the data right away, immerses you in charts and tables, and then overlays those visuals with a user experience that we call the guide-decide loop. Whenever you interact with data, point at something that you think might not be right, AI technologies come to guide you to a next step of cleaning that data, showing you suggestions for what you might do next. But you, the human, decide which of those suggestions is the right next step to take based on your business context. This guide-decide loop is essentially a partnership between artificial intelligence and human intelligence. As you make decisions, your visual transformations are codified in what we call a recipe, an English language description of all the decisions you've made. That recipe can be compiled and run on infrastructure in the cloud to transform data at any scale. And this is the key to connecting that human intent to all the computing you can imagine. A lot has changed in 50 years of computing. And we'd expect you to change the way you transform your data as well, right? Are you still coding like it's the 1960s? Maybe you're using graphical data flow interfaces from the 1980s. My friend, I think you should consider using a modern, visual, AI-imbued experience for transforming your data. One that, after you've gotten through it, can be scaled up to run in cloud environments on any data set of any size. Don't be like this guy driving blind. Get immersed in your data. I'm Professor Joe Hellerstein. This is the Data School. Look forward to seeing you next time when we're going to get a close look at predictive interaction.